Ma'am, you need to step back now. He can't breathe without it. That device is not approved for use during this phase of flight. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, as if the air itself had been tightened. The low hum of the engines blended with the soft, uneven wheeze coming from the little boy in seat 14B. His chest fluttered like paper caught in a draft. A clear plastic mask rested over his face, fogging with every shallow breath, tethered by a thin tube to a compact oxygen concentrator tucked under the seat. The flight attendant stood rigid in the aisle, one hand braced against the overhead bin, the other hovering inches from the cord. Please, the woman whispered. Just give us a minute. Passengers craned their necks. Someone a few rows back muttered that they were already late. Another voice said nothing at all, only watched. The seatbelt sign chimed again, sharp and impatient. The attendant lowered her voice, but it carried. This is non-compliant equipment. I'm required to disconnect it before pushback. The boy's mother shook her head. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. His doctor said not to remove it. Not even for a second. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and distant, asking if the cabin was secure. The plane began to inch backward, then stopped. What no one could see was the way the boy's fingers curled weakly into his mother's sleeve. Or the faint alarm light blinking on the machine, yellow and patient, as if waiting for a decision it should never have been part of. The attendant reached down. That was when a man across the aisle stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch anyone. He simply said, "If you unplug that, you'll have to explain why to someone who won't be wearing a uniform." The aisle froze. Somewhere near the front, a phone camera clicked on. Somewhere near the back, a child began to cry. The captain asked again if they were clear to depart. And in that suspended moment, between policy and breath, between schedule and survival, one choice would quietly ripple far beyond this aircraft. Because there was one thing no one in that cabin realized yet. This flight was not going anywhere. Enjoying this? Tap subscribe for tomorrow's story. The boy's name was Isaiah Carter, and he was 6 years old. He sat perfectly still now, as if even movement cost him something precious. His sneakers didn't reach the floor. The oxygen mask made his small face look even smaller, the clear plastic straps looping behind his ears. Every breath came with a faint mechanical assist, a quiet reassurance his body depended on. His mother, Renee Carter, kept one hand on the machine and the other on her son's knee. She had learned to do that. Touch, but not crowd. Reassure, but never panic. They were moving to Phoenix for Isaiah's treatment. Dallas, Fort Worth was only supposed to be a short stop before the final leg. Renee had followed every instruction. Filled out every form. Called the airline twice. Once 3 weeks ago. Once again the night before. Yes, she had said. Yes, the equipment is FAA compliant. Yes, I have the documentation. Yes, I understand the rules. She carried the folder on her lap now, thick with papers that suddenly felt very thin. The flight attendant's name badge read Megan Lewis. She had been polite at first. Professional. The kind of calm that came from repetition. But something had changed when the plane doors closed. I understand you're concerned, Megan said quietly, though her posture said the conversation was already over. But during pushback, all personal medical devices must be stowed unless pre-cleared by operations. It was pre-cleared, Renee said. She tapped the folder. They told me it was. Megan didn't look at the papers. She glanced toward the front instead, where the cockpit door remained shut. That's not what I'm seeing on my screen. The man who had spoken up earlier sat back down, but he didn't look away. Neither did the woman in the window seat across the aisle. Attention settled into the cabin, the kind that made every sound sharper. Renee felt it pressing against her ribs. She had promised herself she would not beg. Not again. Hospitals had taught her how small that made you feel. But this wasn't a hospital. This was an airplane with no room to step aside. My son can't go without oxygen, she said, keeping her voice level. If you disconnect it, he will struggle. Megan exhaled through her nose. Ma'am, if we don't comply, the aircraft can't depart. The word depart landed heavily. As if that was the real emergency. Renee looked down at Isaiah. His eyes flicked up to her, searching her face. He had learned to read adults very well. It's okay, she said softly, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring. Somewhere, a supervisor was being called. Somewhere else, the captain was waiting. Time stretched thin, pulled between schedules and something far more fragile. Renee realized then that no one had asked Isaiah how he felt. No one had crouched down to his level. No one had listened to the sound of his breathing. They were all listening to rules instead. And as the oxygen machine hummed on, steady and indifferent, Renee understood the truth settling in her chest. If she stayed quiet now, this would all disappear. If she didn't, it would become something else entirely. At this point, would you have done what she did, or walked away? Renee opened the folder. The sound of paper against paper felt louder than it should have. She slid out the top document, careful not to let her hands shake, and held it up between herself and the aisle. This is the approval, she said. From your medical desk. With the device serial number. They told me to keep it accessible. Megan glanced at it briefly, then shook her head. I don't doubt you spoke to someone. But I can't verify this from here. And I can't delay the flight. Behind them, the murmur grew. A man checked his watch. A woman whispered something sharp under her breath. The engines idled restless. The oxygen concentrator gave a soft chime. Renee's heart jumped until she saw the light settle back to green. Isaiah's breathing had changed. Not worse. Not yet. But thinner. Like he was saving air without meaning to. Renee leaned close. Hey, Bug, she murmured. Just keep breathing with me. Megan shifted her weight. Ma'am, I need you to make a choice. Either we disconnect the device, or we return to the gate. Return to the gate. Renee knew what that meant. Rebooking. Delays. Explanations. Missed appointments. Another night in a city that wasn't home. Another round of calls that would start with I'm sorry and end with there's nothing we can do. She also knew what disconnect meant. The man across the aisle stood again, slower this time. You're saying a child's medical equipment is less important than a departure time. Megan's jaw tightened. Sir, please sit down. I will, he said. After someone answers her. A ripple moved through the cabin. Not loud. Not angry. Just present. Eyes lifted. Phones came out, then hesitated, as if people weren't sure yet whether this was something they were allowed to witness. Renee felt suddenly exposed. She hadn't planned to become a center of attention. She had planned to get her son from one place to another without incident. This isn't a debate, Megan said louder now. It's a safety requirement. What safety? Renee asked quietly. Whose? That question hung there, unanswered. The intercom crackled again. The captain asked for a status update. Megan turned toward the front, lowering her voice. We have a compliance issue in the cabin. Compliance. Renee watched Isaiah's chest rise and fall. She thought of the hours she had spent learning the sounds of his breathing. The slight hitch that meant fatigue. The pause that meant danger. She looked up. I'm not disconnecting it. Megan straightened. Then we will have to involve airport operations. Do that, Renee said. She surprised herself with how calm she sounded. Something shifted then. Not the situation, but the way people were watching it. The inconvenience had become a question. The delay had become a line. The man across the aisle nodded once, as if in recognition. A woman 2 rows back whispered, Good for her, without realizing she had said it out loud. Megan stepped away, her heels clicking sharply as she moved toward the front. Renee exhaled, slow and controlled. Isaiah squeezed her finger, weak but present. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew she had crossed a point where silence was no longer an option. Where do you think the line should have been drawn here? 2 uniformed operations managers boarded the aircraft 10 minutes later. They moved with the quiet authority of people used to being deferred to. One was older, gray at the temples. The other held a tablet close to his chest, eyes already scanning before anyone spoke. "Ma'am," the older one said, stopping beside row 14. "I'm David Harlan, Airport Operations." Renee nodded. "My son needs his oxygen." David glanced at Isaiah, then at the machine. His expression softened for just a moment before settling back into neutrality. "We're trying to determine whether this device is approved for use during taxi and takeoff." "It is," Renee said. She offered the folder again. This time, he took it. Passengers leaned subtly into the aisle. No one spoke. The engines were silent now. Somewhere outside, a ground vehicle beeped in reverse. The younger manager tapped at his tablet. "There's no notation in the system," he said. "If it's not logged, we can't allow it active." Renee felt a familiar frustration rise. "I was told a notation wasn't required if I had written clearance." David read the top page carefully. Too carefully. "This approval is from a third-party medical desk," he said. "Not flight operations." "That's who your airline sent me to," Renee replied. The words circled each other without touching. Isaiah shifted. The mask fogged again, quicker this time. Renee adjusted the strap, her movements practiced, almost automatic. David watched that. The way she didn't fumble. The way she never took her eyes off her son. "We have to follow protocol," the younger manager said. "If we make an exception here." "Then what?" the man across the aisle interrupted. "You save a child?" David turned to him. "Sir, please remain seated." The man did. But he didn't look away. Renee noticed something then. David had not once asked Isaiah how he felt. But he had not looked away from him either. "There's another option," David said slowly. "We can deplane and rebook you." Renee nodded. "And how long would that take?" David hesitated. "I can't say." She already knew the answer. A phone buzzed somewhere. Another camera lifted, more openly now. The situation had shifted again. It was no longer just between Renee and the airline. It had witnesses. David lowered his voice. "Ma'am, I need to be honest. If something goes wrong during takeoff, responsibility falls on us." "And if something goes wrong without the oxygen?" Renee asked. That landed differently. The younger manager cleared his throat. "We're not equipped to assess medical risk in real time. But you're comfortable creating one," Renee said. Silence followed. Heavy. Unscripted. David handed the folder back. "I need to consult with flight operations." As he stepped away, Renee caught a glimpse of the tablet screen the younger manager held. Lines of text. Checkboxes. A blank field where something could have been written. She didn't know why that stayed with her. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, tighter now. "We need a decision." Renee looked around the cabin. Faces she would never know. People who had started this flight as strangers and now shared something fragile. She wondered how many of them would remember this moment later. And how many decisions were made every day simply because no one was watching. "Do you see this situation differently now than you did at the start?" The delay passed the 30-minute mark. Seatbelts were still fastened. Overhead lights had dimmed slightly, giving the cabin a late afternoon hush that felt undeserved. Outside the window, another plane taxied past, lifting cleanly into the sky, its ascent smooth and effortless. Renee felt the weight of every passing minute. David returned alone. The tablet was gone. His jacket was unbuttoned now, as if the situation had loosened something in him. "Flight operations says the device is not listed as approved for active use during takeoff," he said. "They're standing by that." Renee nodded slowly. "Did you tell them my son can't breathe without it?" David hesitated. That was answer enough. "Their concern is liability," he said carefully. "If something happens—" "Something is happening," Renee replied. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Just quietly. Isaiah shifted again. His breathing had become audible now, a soft rasp that cut through the cabin's stillness. Renee adjusted the mask, then looked up. You said responsibility matters, she said. So does documentation. Everything I was told is in that folder. David rubbed his jaw. I believe you followed instructions as you understood them. But someone didn't, Renee said. There it was. Not an accusation. An observation. David glanced toward the cockpit door. Toward systems that rarely admitted fault. That may be something to review later. Renee shook her head. Later won't help him. Another pause. Longer this time. Behind them, the man across the aisle spoke again, his voice measured. If this plane doesn't leave, what happens? David turned. We'll time out the crew. The flight will be cancelled. A ripple moved through the cabin. This was no longer an inconvenience. It was a consequence. Renee felt eyes on her again, but the weight had shifted. It was no longer blame. It was gravity. David lowered his voice. Ma'am, if you agree to disconnect the device just for takeoff, we can proceed. Renee looked down at Isaiah. His eyes were half closed now, lashes fluttering with effort. She thought of hospital rooms. Of alarms. Of moments when seconds mattered. No, she said. David closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had changed. I need to make a call, he said. He stepped into the galley, pulling the curtain halfway closed. His voice dropped, but Renee could still hear fragments. No. I'm looking at him now. Yes, I understand protocol, but there's written clearance. No, I'm not comfortable. The younger manager reappeared at the aisle, pale and tense. Ma'am, we may have to escalate this. To who? Renee asked. Corporate medical review, he said. They'll decide. How long? She asked. He didn't answer. Renee leaned back, careful not to jostle the machine. The oxygen concentrator hummed steadily, unaware of debates and delays. It did what it was designed to do. She wondered how many systems depended on silence to function. On people choosing the easier path. On mothers backing down. David returned, curtains sliding open behind him. His face was set now. Resolved. There's one thing I haven't told you yet, he said. Renee looked up. And for the first time since boarding, she felt the direction of this moment begin to tilt. If you were responsible here, what would you have done differently? There's one thing I haven't told you yet, David said again, lowering his voice further. Renee watched his face carefully. She had learned to read doctors the same way, looking not for what they said, but what they avoided. When we pulled your reservation, he continued, there was a note attached. Not in the approval section. Not visible to cabin crew. The younger manager stiffened. That's not. David lifted a hand, stopping him. It was flagged internally, David said. Not medical. Operational. Renee felt a chill. Flagged how? David glanced around the cabin. Dozens of people pretending not to listen. No one pretending very well. It indicates your original clearance call was rerouted, he said. Not by you. By our system. Renee frowned. I spoke to who they transferred me to. Yes, David said. But the call was never logged where it should have been. The words settled slowly. So when Megan checked her screen, Renee said, she saw nothing. David nodded once. Because someone upstream closed the ticket without pushing it through. The oxygen machine hummed. Isaiah breathed. The younger manager shifted. That doesn't change procedure. David turned to him. It changes responsibility. Silence fell again, but this time it felt different. Sharper. Like a truth had been set down, and no one was sure who was supposed to pick it up. You're saying this isn't my mistake, Renee said quietly. I'm saying, David replied, that you did what you were told. And the system didn't. A murmur moved through the cabin, restrained but unmistakable. Phones that had been lowered came back up. Not dramatically. Purposefully. The man across the aisle exhaled. So what happens now? David straightened. Now I escalated differently. He turned toward the cockpit and knocked firmly. The door opened partway. Low voices exchanged words Renee couldn't hear. She caught only fragments. Internal flag, written clearance, child on oxygen. The captain's face appeared briefly, tight with concentration. He nodded once and closed the door again. Minutes passed. Megan returned to the aisle, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at Renee at first. She looked at the oxygen machine. Then she spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough to carry. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," she said. "I should have asked more questions." Renee felt her throat tighten, unexpected and sudden. David addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are pausing departure pending a full operational review. You may remain seated, or you're free to deplane if you choose." No one moved. The younger manager stared at his tablet as if it had betrayed him. Renee leaned down, brushing Isaiah's hair back. His breathing had steadied. His fingers loosened their grip on her sleeve. She realized then that the power in the cabin had shifted, not dramatically, not triumphantly, but unmistakably. The rules were still there. But they were no longer alone. David met Renee's eyes. "This doesn't end here," he said. "It can't." She nodded. "I don't want it to." Around them, the plane remained grounded. Engines silent. Schedules broken open. But what no one realized was this. The call David had just made didn't stop at flight operations. It went much higher. Did this change who you thought was telling the truth? The call came back 20 minutes later. Not to the cockpit. Not to the gate. To David's phone. He stepped a few paces away from row 14, his voice low, his posture suddenly formal. Renee couldn't hear the words, but she could see the change in his shoulders. The way he stood straighter. The way he stopped pacing. "Yes," he said once. Then, after a pause, "Understood." He ended the call and turned back toward the aisle. "Captain will be making an announcement," David said. "Before that, I need to clarify something." The younger manager looked up sharply. "This is still an operational. This is a compliance audit," David said, cutting him off. "Effective immediately." That word landed hard. Audit. David addressed Renee first. "The clearance you were given wasn't just mishandled. It was overridden." Renee's brow furrowed. "By who?" "By an automated risk filter," David said. "One that flags certain requests for secondary review." "Certain how?" the man across the aisle asked. David hesitated, then answered carefully. "Non-standard equipment. Pediatric cases. And discretionary routing." Renee felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. "Discretionary for who?" David met her gaze. "For the system." The cabin was silent now in a way that felt deliberate. Listening. "That filter is supposed to be reviewed by a human before anything is closed," David continued. "In your case, it wasn't. So the system decided my son was too complicated," Renee said. "Yes," David said. "And no one corrected it." The captain's voice came over the intercom then, no longer distant. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight is cancelled. We will not be departing today." A collective breath moved through the cabin. Not anger. Not relief. Something heavier. "We are standing down this aircraft pending an internal compliance review," the captain continued. "Your safety, and the safety of every passenger, depends on us getting this right." Phones were no longer discreet. No one pretended now. The younger manager swallowed. "You can't ground a flight over a paperwork error." David turned to him. "This isn't paperwork." He gestured gently toward Isaiah. "This is the consequence of removing human judgment from human lives." Renee felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. She had spent too long holding herself together to let go now. David crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Isaiah's level for the first time. "Hey there," he said softly. "You did great." Isaiah looked at him through the clear mask and nodded once. Ground staff began to arrive at the aircraft door. Supervisors. Clipboards. Quiet urgency. Renee realized then what David had meant earlier. The call hadn't gone higher within the airline. It had gone outside it. The audit team would review not just this flight, but every similar decision made by the same filter. Every closed ticket. Every unasked question. The man across the aisle shook his head slowly. All this, he said, because someone wouldn't listen. Renee looked down at her son, then back up at the cabin full of strangers who had stayed seated. No, she said quietly. Because someone finally did. What matters more here, following rules or doing what's right? The terminal buzzed with confusion. Passengers from the cancelled flight stood in loose clusters near the gate, phones pressed to ears, voices low and urgent. Some were rebooking. Some were explaining. Some simply sat, staring at nothing. Renee and Isaiah were escorted to a quiet corner near the windows. A paramedic knelt beside Isaiah, checking his levels without disconnecting the oxygen. Gentle. Unhurried. You did the right thing, the paramedic said to Renee, quietly. Renee nodded, though the words hadn't fully reached her yet. David stood a short distance away, speaking with two people in dark suits who hadn't arrived through the jet bridge. They listened more than they spoke. When they did speak, it was in short questions that demanded exact answers. Megan stood alone near the gate desk. Her shoulders were drawn in now. Not defensive. Reflective. The younger operations manager was nowhere to be seen. Within the hour, an internal notice went out. Not public. Not yet. It instructed all crews to suspend enforcement of the automated medical filter pending review. Every flagged case was to be reopened. Immediately. It was quiet accountability. The kind that didn't announce itself. David approached Renee as the paramedic finished. Your son is stable, he said. We've arranged ground transport to your hotel and priority rebooking once this is resolved. Thank you, Renee said. He hesitated. There will be an inquiry. They'll want your statement. Renee nodded. I'll give it. Not today, David said. Today you take care of him. She studied his face. What happens to you? David considered that. I'll be part of the record, he said. I'm comfortable with that. Across the terminal, a woman from the flight approached Renee. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. I just wanted you to know, the woman said. My brother uses oxygen too. He's been told no more times than I can count. Renee felt something loosen in her chest. I'm sorry. The woman shook her head. I'm grateful. Others watched from a distance. Some nodded. Some didn't. Not everyone understood what had happened. They didn't need to. By evening, a regional directive grounded 3 additional flights that had similar unresolved flags. Maintenance logs were checked. Call records pulled. Human reviewers assigned. It wasn't dramatic. It was thorough. Renee watched the sun sink behind the runway lights as Isaiah slept, his breathing even, his mask rising and falling with quiet persistence. She thought about how close this had come to disappearing. To being smoothed over. To being reduced to a delay code. Instead, it had become a line in a report that would be read by people who had never seen Isaiah's face. But his name would be there. And so would the moment someone chose to stop the plane. Does this feel like accountability to you, or something else? The hotel room was quiet in the way only unfamiliar places are. Isaiah slept in the center of the bed, his small chest rising and falling beneath the thin blanket. The oxygen concentrator sat beside him on the nightstand, its steady hum the softest sound in the room. Renee lay fully dressed on the edge of the mattress, one hand resting lightly on his ankle, as if contact alone could keep the day from returning. Her phone buzzed for the 3rd time that evening. She let it ring once more before answering. Yes, she said. This is Renee Carter. The voice on the other end was careful. Trained. Ms. Carter, my name is Elaine Porter. I'm with the airline's compliance review team. Renee closed her eyes. I was told this could wait. It can, Elaine said quickly. This call isn't for testimony. It's for clarity. Renee waited. We've reviewed the call logs, Elaine continued. Your original request was rerouted automatically. It should have been reopened by a human reviewer. It wasn't. So the system failed, Renee said. The system, Elaine replied, was allowed to replace judgment. Renee looked at Isaiah. His brow was smooth now. Untroubled. Elaine continued. We're revising protocol. Effective immediately, pediatric medical equipment approvals will require direct confirmation and visible notation to cabin crew. No filters. No silent closures. Renee felt a slow breath move through her. That won't help us today. No, Elaine said. But it may help the next family. Renee nodded once, even though Elaine couldn't see it. That matters. There was a pause. Then Elaine said, Your flight tomorrow morning is confirmed. Same crew will not be assigned. Renee smiled faintly. Thank you. After the call ended, Renee sat in the dark a long time. She thought about the choice she had been asked to make. About how close she had come to doubting herself. About how easily the word policy could erase a person. In the morning, they returned to the airport. The new gate agent knelt when she saw Isaiah. Asked him his favorite color. Asked Renee if she needed anything before boarding. No one reached for the machine. No one questioned the mask. As they settled into their seats, a man a few rows ahead turned and gave Renee a small nod. Not gratitude. Recognition. When the plane lifted into the sky, Isaiah slept through it. Renee watched the city fall away beneath them and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief. Resolve. Because she knew now that silence wasn't neutral. And dignity, once defended, had a way of traveling further than fear. What part of this stayed with you the most? 3 months later, the desert light in Phoenix softened as evening came on. Isaiah sat cross-legged on the living room floor, carefully lining up small plastic airplanes he'd collected from clinic visits and gift shops. He gave each one a destination under his breath. Chicago. Denver. Dallas. The child-sized oxygen mask rested nearby on the coffee table, unused for the moment, its clear tubing coiled neatly beside it. It no longer frightened him. It was simply part of the room. Part of life. Renee watched from the doorway, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. The treatments were working. Slowly. Not miraculously. But enough to notice. Enough to hope. Her phone buzzed once. An email. She didn't open it right away. She had learned not every message needed immediate attention anymore. Later, after Isaiah went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table and read it. The airline's compliance review had concluded. The automated medical filter had been permanently suspended. A human review requirement was now written into policy. Training updates issued. Escalation paths clarified. There was no apology written for the world to see. There didn't need to be. Attached was a brief note from David Harlan. You were right to insist. The system needed a face. Thank you for making us stop. Renee closed the laptop and sat quietly. She thought about that flight sometimes. Not with anger. With clarity. About how easily momentum could have carried everyone forward. About how close she had come to being persuaded that inconvenience mattered more than breath. At the clinic the following week, a woman in the waiting room noticed Isaiah's old oxygen bag. My daughter uses one too, the woman said. They almost didn't let us fly last year. Renee met her eyes. They will now. The woman frowned slightly. How do you know? Renee smiled, small and certain. Because someone stopped a plane. That night, Renee stood at Isaiah's doorway longer than usual. He slept on his side, one arm flung over his pillow, breathing easy. The mask sat on the nightstand, untouched, a quiet witness to a chapter that had closed but would never quite disappear. Renee understood now that justice didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived as a line rewritten. A checkbox removed. A human being taught to pause. She turned off the light and closed the door gently. After everything, do you think this truly changed anything? Yendi, thanks for watching.